After my breakup, I got drunk. My roommate held me close and whispered, "Choose me instead." The night my heart shattered, I thought I had lost everything worth loving. I walked into my apartment soaked by cold rain, carrying nothing but a bottle of whiskey and the crushing weight of betrayal. I had spent 5 years building a future with someone who looked into my eyes and promised forever, only to replace me with someone else before I even realized our love had become a memory. I believed that was the end of my story. I had no idea it was only the painful beginning of something far more beautiful. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the incredible power of love to heal broken hearts, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us love can still surprise us. There was something strangely quiet about heartbreak. Movies always showed dramatic crying and endless screaming, but real heartbreak sounded like silence. It sounded like staring at a phone that would never light up again. It sounded like sitting alone in a room filled with memories that suddenly felt like strangers. Every picture on the wall became a reminder that plans could disappear overnight. Every corner of my apartment carried echoes of laughter that no longer belonged there. My roommate Ethan had lived with me for nearly 3 years. We had met through mutual friends after college when rent prices became impossible to manage alone. He was easygoing, respectful, and somehow always knew when someone needed space. We were completely different people. I chased ambitious careers and impossible expectations. Ethan collected old vinyl records, cooked homemade meals, and believed that happiness was hidden inside ordinary moments. I used to tease him for being too optimistic, while he laughed and told me that someday life would slow me down enough to understand. The evening of my breakup, he was sitting in the living room reading a book when I stumbled through the front door with the whiskey bottle hanging loosely from my hand. He looked up immediately, and before I even spoke, his expression changed. Somehow he already knew something terrible had happened. I didn't explain much. I couldn't. The words refused to come out. I simply walked past him, collapsed onto the couch, twisted open the bottle, and started drinking straight from it as if the burning liquid could erase memories faster than tears. Hours passed without meaning. The city lights outside blurred into glowing streaks through the apartment windows. I couldn't stop replaying every conversation, every promise, every vacation, every anniversary. Had any of it been real? Had she stopped loving me months ago while pretending everything was fine? Was I simply too blind to notice? The alcohol made the questions louder instead of quieter. Eventually, the bottle slipped from my trembling hands and rolled across the floor. My head spun violently. I buried my face into my palms, finally allowing myself to cry without trying to hide it. Those tears weren't graceful. They weren't cinematic. They came from somewhere deep inside that had been holding everything together for far too long. I felt someone gently sit beside me. It was Ethan. He didn't rush to give advice. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He didn't criticize my ex or pretend to understand exactly how I felt. Instead, he simply stayed. Sometimes the greatest kindness is refusing to leave. When my breathing became uneven and I nearly fell sideways from exhaustion, he wrapped one arm carefully around my shoulders and held me steady. I remember barely hearing his voice through the fog of heartbreak and alcohol. He leaned close enough that I could hear him over my own sobbing. He whispered softly that maybe it was finally time to choose someone who had never stopped choosing me. Those words barely registered that night. In my drunken haze, I thought I had imagined them. The following morning arrived with a pounding headache that felt almost merciful compared to the ache inside my chest. The apartment smelled like fresh coffee. There was aspirin waiting beside a glass of water. A simple breakfast sat on the kitchen table. No note. No dramatic speech. Just quiet care. Ethan had already left for work before I woke up. For the next several weeks, my world became painfully small. Going to work required every ounce of energy I possessed. Smiling during meetings felt like acting in a play. Friends invited me out, but I declined nearly every invitation because pretending to be okay seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Ethan continued living exactly as he always had. He never forced conversations. He never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. He simply existed as a steady presence. When groceries appeared in the refrigerator, he had quietly picked up my favorite snacks. When laundry piled up because I couldn't find motivation, he'd casually toss mine into the washing machine with his own. When I worked late, dinner somehow remained warm in the oven. None of it felt dramatic. None of it demanded recognition. It was simply love disguised as ordinary kindness. One Sunday afternoon, I found an old photograph while cleaning my bedroom. It showed my ex and me smiling during a beach vacation. Looking at it no longer filled me with overwhelming sadness. Instead, I noticed something surprising. The smile in the picture looked forced. I remembered that vacation differently. We had argued constantly. We barely spoke during the drive home. Somehow, over time, my memory had erased the difficult parts and preserved only the beautiful ones. Maybe heartbreak wasn't just losing someone. Maybe it was mourning a version of the relationship that never truly existed. That realization changed everything. Life didn't magically become easy. Healing never works that way. Some mornings still began with loneliness. Certain songs still reopened old wounds. Certain places still carried memories sharp enough to steal my breath. But those moments slowly became less frequent. One evening, Ethan invited me to join him for a walk through the neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. For the first time in months, I noticed how beautiful the world still looked despite everything I had lost. We talked for hours. Not about heartbreak. Not about relationships. We talked about childhood dreams, embarrassing memories, favorite books, future vacations, family traditions, and everything that makes people feel wonderfully human. I laughed. Really laughed. The sound surprised both of us. It had been missing for a very long time. As autumn replaced summer, our friendship quietly transformed into something deeper. There was never a dramatic confession. No grand romantic gesture. Only countless tiny moments. Watching movies until midnight. Making pancakes on Saturday mornings. Shopping for groceries while arguing over cereal brands. Driving nowhere in particular just to watch the stars outside the city. The love growing between us wasn't explosive. It was peaceful. Safe. Patient. One evening, while sorting through old boxes before moving apartments, I discovered the empty whiskey bottle from the night everything fell apart. I stared at it for several minutes. Months earlier, that bottle had represented surrender. Now it represented survival. I carried it outside and threw it into the recycling bin. When I returned inside, Ethan smiled without asking what had happened. Some victories don't need explanation. Winter arrived with cold winds and early sunsets. One snowy evening, the apartment lost electricity during a storm. We wrapped ourselves in blankets, lit candles, and played card games by candlelight while waiting for power to return. There was something magical about that quiet darkness. Without television or phones, we simply talked. Hours disappeared. Eventually I asked him something that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the night of my breakup. I asked whether he had really whispered those words to me months ago or whether I had imagined them. He looked embarrassed. Then he smiled. He admitted he had whispered them. Not because he expected anything. Not because he wanted to take advantage of someone vulnerable. But because loving someone silently for years had become too painful to keep hidden forever. He had fully expected me to forget. Instead, I had carried those words inside me all along. I looked at him differently that night. Not because he had confessed. but because I finally understood how many invisible acts of love had surrounded me without ever asking for recognition. Real love had never been loud. It had been making coffee before sunrise, remembering my favorite soup when I was sick, waiting patiently for my heart to heal instead of demanding attention, choosing me every single day without expecting anything in return. For the first time since my breakup, I realized I wasn't comparing someone new to my past. I wasn't trying to replace lost love. I was discovering a completely different kind of love. One built on friendship before romance, respect before passion, consistency before promises. Months later, we stood together overlooking the same city skyline visible from our apartment window. The light stretched endlessly beneath the evening sky. I thought back to the broken man holding a whiskey bottle, convinced his life had ended. If I could have spoken to that version of myself, I would have told him not to chase people determined to leave. I would have told him that heartbreak sometimes clears space for people who have quietly loved us all along. Most importantly, I would have told him that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in cups of coffee, shared meals, comforting silence, gentle patience. Small moments repeated every day until broken hearts slowly remember how to beat without pain. The following spring, Ethan and I moved into a smaller apartment across town. Not because we needed more space. Because we wanted a place that belonged to our future instead of our past. As we unpacked boxes together, I found another old photograph of my ex. This time I smiled. Not because I missed her. Because I realized she had unknowingly led me toward the greatest blessing of my life. Some endings don't destroy us. They quietly redirect us toward the people who were always meant to stay. Love isn't always the person who makes your heart race. Sometimes it's the person who sits beside you while your world falls apart. Sometimes it's the one who patiently waits while you learn to love yourself again. Sometimes it's the roommate who held you together when you couldn't stand on your own. Years later, people would ask us how we met. We always laughed. Because our story didn't begin with romance. It began with heartbreak. It began with kindness. It began on the worst night of my life, when someone chose compassion over convenience and stayed beside a broken soul who had forgotten he was still worthy of love. Looking back now, I no longer remember the pain as clearly as I remember the healing. I no longer remember the betrayal as strongly as I remember the quiet acts of devotion that followed. Heartbreak introduced me to loss. But kindness introduced me to hope. And hope eventually became love. If this story touched your heart, please type the word hope in the comments below. We'd love to know that its message reached you. As our lives continued together, I finally understood something heartbreak had tried so desperately to teach me. The people meant for your future rarely arrive with fireworks. They arrive with patience. They arrive with consistency. They arrive with quiet love that asks for nothing except the chance to stand beside you when life becomes unbearable. And sometimes, the greatest love story begins the moment you stop chasing the person who walked away and finally notice the one who never left.